Today we're talking about one of the most iconic old school tricks of all time, the boneless one. Where did it come from and where did it get that weird name? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Rad Rat Video. On this channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I cover topics from all over the skateboarding world, from game reviews to audience questions on Ask Rad Rat, to trick histories like this one, where we're talking about the history of the boneless. And before we get too far into this, let's just get on the same page. The original version of the trick was known as a boneless one, which Thrasher defined as a front-footed front-side foot plant. It's a real mouthful. Specifically, it was on transition or banks. And we'll get into the other variations later, but that's the original version of the trick. And also, while we're here, look at the definition of vidiot, which is any person who considers the playing of video games as actually something to do. Symptoms: swollen hands, square-shaped eyes. It's funny because Thrasher later made their own game, but a lot changed in those 16 years. So, who really invented the boneless? There's not really that much debate on it, so let's just get it out of the way. It seems to have been invented by Gary Scott Davis, known as GSD. And Jeff Phillips, he also used to claim that he invented it too, but there isn't a lot of evidence. At best, he co-invented it independently, but it seems pretty safe to say that it was GSD. So here is GSD's story. In December 1979, influenced by a trick I saw in Skateboarder magazine called the foot plant, done backside planting the rear foot, I thought up a frontside version planting the front foot. It all happened when Robert Hamrick, Mark Mounts, and I were messing around with our boards while sitting on the floor in Robert's house. We considered this trick impossible and promptly forgot about it for the next few months. Mark called me up in the spring of that year, breathless, announcing he'd just pulled that trick I had thought up. I rushed down to the D.O. banks in Cincinnati, only to find him popping boneless ones 3 feet off of the main bank. Within a few minutes, I was doing that impossible trick too. We were blown away at how much higher and easier we could boost than with a backside foot plant. At first, the trick was given the literal and not exactly catchy front-footed front-side foot plant moniker, which stuck for over a year until Robert renamed it the boneless one, after a puppet of his, Harry the Boneless One. There's another account that specifies they were laying on the floor, riding up the couch and using the cushions like coping and working stuff out that way. Okay, so he thought it up in December '79 and his friend Mark Mounts landed it first a couple of months later. They used to have something called Boneless Day. People were trying to get it together online. It doesn't look like it really went anywhere, but they specifically picked out the date December 1st as the exact day that happened. I don't think there's any proof of that specific date, and I don't really think it matters anyway, but just throwing it out there. But what's up with that name? So he mentioned that it was named in '81 after Robert Hamrick's puppet called Harry the Boneless One. He was boneless, and therefore he needed your hand and your bones to move around. But what exactly did the trick look like back then? This isn't something I'm really sure of. So a foot plant can mean a few different things. Either a boneless as we know it, where you use the foot plant to launch up into the air, or it could be like a front side air where you land on your foot and then hop back in, or it could just be a stall where you jump out of it and then land in transition. He mentions popping them 3 feet high on that first day, so it sounds like it's the way that we do them now, but take a look at this. This is from October '83. It's a sequence of 2 backside bonelesses done by Steve Caballero and Neil Blender. And as you can see, there are backside airs into a boneless plant and then a hop back in. Of course, that's backside, which you can't really get the same kind of pop out of, but it's still interesting. Later in that same issue, it mentions Hans Gothberg, and it says that his boneless ones are 4 feet plus easily. So my thought is that the front side ones are launched in the air like we're used to today, and only the backside ones were stalled out like that, but I just wanted to point out the possibility just to be thorough. Okay, so it was GSD, but if you're like me, you probably haven't even heard of him. If you weren't there at the time, you probably wouldn't have heard his name. I know, I definitely didn't until this research. So here's a history of GSD. Before turning pro, he ran the first ever skate zine called Skate Fate Zine. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he ran the first no comply photo that we know of. And that magazine ran from '81 until '91. It was handmade on a photocopier, but he had interviews with a lot of the big names at the time. It had comics drawn by Neil Blender and all kinds of other content. He actually sells a best of book right now that compiles all the best content from that era, and you can flip through it on their site. GSD turned pro in 1985, 5 years after inventing the trick that got street skating going. Think about that. Before him, you could ride around, you could do acid drops, caveman stuff, you could do early grabs on the street, maybe some street plants and stalls on curbs, but no complies hadn't even been invented yet. You can watch a video about that right here. So the boneless one had a huge impact, and yet it took him 5 years to go pro. In fact, in an interview, he said he probably should have been pro until 85 because that's when he became a washed up has-been. It's funny, but the first pro footage of him I was able to find has him placing 9th place out of 10 in the contest. He says his first model with tracker was the first ever true street board though, so that's pretty cool. He was pro until 89 and he made a few other appearances on video before fading away. When he was asked about ollies in modern skating, he said, "I didn't ollie early on, but I did get into ollies in the late 80s. I never did a handrail or anything though. I could ollie up onto curbs and bus benches." He also added, "I was instantly made irrelevant by the Gons and Nodis and all those guys." Since that point, he toured with a band for a while, he worked for Skateboarder magazine when it restarted, and later worked for and with Soltech. So, common question about the boneless and boneless related tricks is, what's the difference between a boneless, a fast plant, and a bean plant? And this is confusing to some because the Tony Hawk games put them in, and they all work exactly like a boneless. They even had a Mike B boneless, which is in there too. It's just a frontside 540 boneless, but so it's a little confusing to people. But all these tricks are different foot plant variations, and they can all be done either as a way to get extra air or as a stall. And a lot of early foot plants, like the ones that inspired GSD, when you pop the board into your hand out of coping, stall on your back foot, and then hop back in. GSD changed it up with a boneless, which is front-footed, and that works better on street because you have more time to jump before you catch up with your foot. Bean plants are basically the same thing, but grabbed on the heel side. Grabbing heel side on a front side air was called a lean air, which is Neil Blender's name backward. So lean and boneless, bean plant. These days, we don't really make that much of a distinction. If you grab mute or even nose grab and do a boneless, people will still just call all that stuff bonelesses. But fast plants are a bit different. You ollie up into the air, grab the board, then plant your foot on something. It's usually done with a back foot, so it's an ollie foot plant on an obstacle. Aside from that, there are countless different boneless hand flip variations you can do. I made a trick tip about 8 years ago you can find on my channel right here. I prefer to do boneless flips back into a grab because that feels more legit to me, but there really isn't any rule there. There are also guys like Nicholas Carbone who are doing all kinds of different variations and flips. The sky's the limit, really. But just like no complies, boneless ones fell out of style around 1990. They're getting popular again, but it hasn't really had the same comeback as no complies. It seems like a lot of people have a hang up against actually grabbing onto the board and pulling it up into the air. Plus, it's really easy to do some seriously ugly boneless tricks. Because of that, the trick has gotten kind of a reputation as being a cheap or fake trick, maybe something for kids. I don't really think that's the case though. It just depends on how you do them. Alright, so are there any other old school tricks you want to see me talk about? Let me know in the comments. Until then, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any more trick history videos coming up, or my game reviews or trick tips on the Shred School. Thank you for watching.